They do the research and travel to another country where they get world-class treatment in a world-class facility by a world-class doctor. They get exactly the same kind of treatment. And in some cases, they get better treatment because it's a procedure that's not available here in the U.S. or in their home country. And we found that in Central, South America, Mexico areas, you can figure on saving at least half, sometimes as much as 70%. And if you go to, say, Thailand or India and places like that, a lot of times people are saving up to 90%.
Welcome to the Borderless Podcast, your guide to traveling, investing, and living beyond borders, where we talk about living the life that you want to live, where you want to live it. From beautiful San Miguel de Allende, smack in the middle of Mexico. With your hosts, Jonathan Lockwood and James Guzman.
Welcome to the Borderless Podcast, traveling, investing, and living beyond borders. We like to talk about all of the things it takes to get you beyond your borders, whether we're talking about living, traveling internationally, location-independent businesses, more self-reliance. Jonathan Lockwood here with James Guzman. Hey, James.
How you doing, Jonathan?
Good. So it looks like it's getting a little bit warmer here.
It sure is. Love to see that sun back out, warming things up.
Sunny stuff, still getting a little chilly at night, but at least it warms up nicely during the day.
Yep.
And tomorrow I'm planning on going to that organic Saturday market again. You go to that sometimes.
I do,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's several of them. You know, there's lots of different markets here around town for the local fincas. You know, where they grow all kinds of different organic food, and they have chickens and all kinds of stuff. So it's great.
Yeah, I love this particular one. The Cargers, our friends, took me there last year when I came, but as is usually the case, I'm just a little slow about it. And I finally really have fully embraced this thing. That's where I'm planning to go ahead and do like my produce shopping every week. And I've discovered there's just too much stuff to look at when you go there one time. There are too many booths, but I'm gonna slowly try to understand what is available there and just do most of my shopping there each week if I can.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great place to go.
All right. So this week on the Borderless Podcast, we're going to talk about the subject of medical tourism. And it's something that comes up quite a lot among people who are interested in getting out of the United States. And it does shine some light on a difference between the medical system in the U.S. and some of the countries outside of it. So we found John Cote. Now, John Cote is an award-winning and Amazon.com #1 best-selling author of several books. First of all, he has a company called John Cote and Associates. It's a certified member of the Power Marketing Consultants Network, and it creates growth strategies, marketing campaigns, and lead capture systems for businesses and organizations of any size. But he's also the creator and host of the #1 podcast in medical tourism. It's called Healthcare Elsewhere, a medical tourism show where he interviews doctors, healthcare experts, and patients worldwide who participate in medical tourism. Welcome, John Cote.
Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you very much for being on here. So you actually are a successful podcaster. How long have you been podcasting, John?
We're just about coming up on our 9-month anniversary. We're still kind of new compared to the rest of the community out there, but we launched on April 21st of last year of 2014. We're here in January now of 2015. So it's been about 9 months.
Beautiful. Well, what was it that brought you to this subject of medical tourism?
Well, it was a twofold kind of a thing that happened. It was somewhat serendipitous. I kind of fell into it. My wife and I, have this agency, and we, on the one hand, we had some personal experience with this without really realizing that it was called medical tourism. My wife is a 2-time cancer survivor. We had adopted our children from overseas, and so she had, separately. So she had traveled for her medical treatment several times. We adopted our kids from a different country and had experiences with their medical system. And so that was, kind of played part of it. But then about a year and a half ago, I got invited or was asked because of my marketing expertise to speak at a medical tourism conference. And I said, great, I'd love to do that. We speak all the time, but can you please explain to me what medical tourism is? And so they gave me the definition, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I understand that. That's great. Actually, my wife and I have been medical tourists then, I guess, by that definition. And so we went and put a presentation on about medical tourism. or about marketing for these group of medical tourists in Las Vegas. It was late of 2013. And what was interesting was as we were doing the research and setting up the keynotes slides for this, we discovered that there was basically nobody doing a full-time podcast about medical tourism. I mean, if you go into the podcast community and look around on iTunes or, wherever you get your podcast from, there's all kinds of stuff about sports and entrepreneurship and business and leadership and, all these other things, but nobody was really doing anything with it. So I mentioned that to the attendees and said, hey, this is a great opportunity for you to create some fantastic content that will help to educate your potential clients and patients that would want to come to see you with some, some examples and stories of people who have successfully traveled. And you could really crush it. And everyone thought that was great. We signed a bunch of books and everything was super. And then nobody did anything with it. So what ended up, that's great for somebody else. I'm not going to do that. Right. It's like, all right, great. So what we ended up doing a couple months later, once we saw that no one was doing anything with it, we decided to go ahead and start our own podcast about that exactly. So we did the research, came up with a name, got some artwork, and launched it. And we actually were fortunate enough, because of our marketing background and all the expertise that I had in launching books into, number one bestsellers, we used that same process to do that for our podcast. And we were fortunate enough to launch it number one in new and noteworthy in our category, which was great. We have had a great run of success. We've had over 1 million downloads in 9 months. So that was kind of how we stumbled into it. And, now after 9 months of doing all these interviews, I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I certainly have had my eyes open and learned a lot about what works and what doesn't in medical tourism.
That's great. It's funny. I was listening to another podcast. It was Tim Ferriss' podcast, and he had one of the editors of Wired magazine. And he said that that's something he always does when he comes up with an idea that he thinks is great. He tries to give it to all these people that he think would be interested. And all his best ideas have been ones that he tried to give away for 5, 6, 7 years, and nobody takes it. So he says, you know what, forget it, I'm going to do it. And
wow, that's great validation.
Yeah, exactly. And he says if he still thinks it's a good idea after all that time and nobody else has done it, then he just goes ahead and does it. Would you mind going ahead and defining medical tourism is? Some people might not know what that means.
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically what it boils down to is, we interview people from all over the world, from here in the United States. What we tend to find is that it's people who they have a need for a procedure, whether it be weight loss surgery or hip replacement or cancer treatment or something like that. And they can't get it here in the United States because of a variety of reasons. Usually it's because their insurance doesn't cover it, or the deductible is too high, or they don't have insurance and they can't afford it. So as an example, weight loss surgery would probably cost somewhere on the order of anywhere from, $25,000 to, $50,000 or something on that general variety. If you got it here in the United States with insurance. Now, there are people here in the United States, doctors groups, where you can get it done for less than that. But in general, it's fairly expensive, and most people don't have that kind of money laying around. So what they end up doing is they travel, they do the research and travel to another country where they get world-class treatment in a world-class facility by a world-class doctor. They get exactly the same kind of treatment. And in some cases, they get better treatment because it's a procedure that's not available here in the U.S. or in their home country. And usually they can get it for a lot less money. And we found that in Central, South America, Mexico areas, those areas tend to be, for most procedures, you can figure on saving at least half, sometimes as much as 70%. Mm-hmm. And if you go to, say, Thailand or India and places like that, a lot of times people are saving up to 90%.
Wow.
And so inevitably, the next question that comes, which I'm assuming you're probably going to ask, is, well, does that, are they cutting corners, or what's going on with that? Is that, why is it so inexpensive? How are they possibly going out there? It just seems dangerous or whatever. And, my answer to that is no, it's just arbitrage. All you're doing is, hey, you make a certain standard of living here in the United States, and they don't have the same litigiousness. They don't have the same legal system. They don't have the same problems and issues with things being so overpriced in those countries, and they can give you world-class service for a fraction of the cost. And that's really what it comes down to.
Why don't we touch on that whole thing there? What are the primary reasons why people would fear receiving medical treatment outside their country?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And because we get when people approach me and say I've never even heard of this medical tourism concept, and I admit, hey, I hadn't really heard of it either when I first got started, talking about it and interviewing people about it. I think for a lot of people, I forget the latest statistics here in the United States. For example, I think something like less than half of people in the United States have a passport and have left the country. So for a lot of people, they're just like, oh, I would never travel to another country because that just sounds dangerous. Or they saw that one report on some national TV program, where they did the big expose about somebody, who died or had some kind of problem overseas with some kind of medical tourism thing. And yes, of course, those kinds of things do happen. But let's not overlook the fact that something like 45,000 people died from medical malpractice here in the United States last year, according to, a couple of government statistics that I saw. So it's not that it doesn't happen. It's just that, you can go overseas, do your research over there, and in my opinion, anyway, of all the things that I've seen and read and done and the research that I've seen, as long as you do your due diligence, talk to people who have been over there and done it, and you're confident that you're getting in with a good group of doctors in a clean facility and everything's good to go, you're just as well off there, if not better, because their infection rates are lower sometimes than you are here in the United States.
Yeah, one example that I kind of wanted to throw out there was about, I believe it was about 2.5 years ago now. I had LASIK surgery. I had my eyes fixed. It was $450 an eye, I believe, which was much lower than I checked out some places in the United States, and it was much lower. It was a great facility and hospital. I had it done here in Mexico. I was in Acapulco at the time, and it's a very quick procedure. Went in, they checked me out, and then went in a second time, and half an hour, and it was done, and no problems at all.
Yeah, and I hear those kinds of examples all the time, and it's funny when you talk to people, especially medical professionals in Eastern, or basically in Europe and America and places like that, Canada. If they're not familiar with the concept, a lot of times their first reaction is, if a patient asks them, well, I'm thinking of going down and getting dental work done or LASIK done in another country, is they kind of recoil in horror, and they're just like, what, you're going to do what? That sounds risky and dangerous. I wouldn't recommend you do that. Well, A, you're taking money out of their pocket, and if you do, and B, if you do, for them, they're, it's just the way that they've been brought up, the way that they do their medical practices. And I'm not trying to disparage the U.S. medical system. I mean, my wife's a 2-time cancer survivor. She's had great treatments, and it worked out well for her. She was, terminal, wasn't even supposed to make it. And, she's still here now. I have a son who is deaf and has had cochlear implants, some major, surgery that was done here in the United States, but it costs like $80,000 per surgery. You can get that done overseas for a lot less expensive now. So, when you look at it, to me, as long as you're vetting out the doctors and the facilities that you're going out to, I really think there's a great and viable opportunity for anyone to go, whether you're for Obamacare or against it, you can't argue that things have dramatically changed the landscape here in the U.S. And in some places like Canada, for example, I can tell you an example about some people who, they get on a waiting list for like 2 years. They can't wait. They need to get this taken care of right away. So I just really think that, hey, this is just another option for people to say, look, we can go to another place, get world-class treatment, and sometimes even in a nicer facility with a private nurse and all this other stuff going on for much less expensive than we can here in the United States or in our home country. And a lot of people are starting to do that.
I'm guessing that there are certain parts of the world that specialize in certain types of medical care or surgeries. Is that generally the case?
I think you can find almost any kind of treatment just about anywhere. I do see, areas, pockets where, you see a lot of things. Like right now in the United States, it's not, especially in the southern United States and southwestern United States, if you say, I'm going to get dental work down in Mexico, not many people are going to bat an eyelash at that. They're pretty much going to go, oh, yeah, I've heard of that before, because you can get things done much less expensively. For example, it's called All on 4. It's basically kind of like full, let's say all your teeth are bad and they have to take them all out, and they're going to give you all new, not just dentures that kind of slip on and slip off. These are permanent, teeth that they put in there. And something like that in the U.S. costs like $30,000, $35,000. Well, you can get it done for not even a quarter of that price down in Mexico. And, a lot of the doctors, a lot of the dentists are, trained in Europe or in the United States or at, very prestigious facilities in, down in Mexico. They're very well trained, great stuff. Their staff, most of them speak some English, so there's no issues there. They're using all the same materials that you would be using, all the same name brands and everything else that you get in the United States. And they also have a lot more time to just, deal with you, to talk with you and sit down and allay your fears and alleviate your fears and things like that.
So this is not to say that just any place in Mexico is going to do a good job for you, though, right?
Correct. Just like in the United States or anywhere else. I mean, let's face it, somewhere in the U.S. and somewhere in Canada and somewhere in France, there is the worst doctor in that country. And they're practicing. And I guarantee, I'm a marketing guy, right? So, I guarantee you they can go out and find 5 or 10 people who can give them glowing, beautiful testimonials that they'll put on their website. They're certainly not going to put on their website their testimonials from the people who they got, poor service from, which is where, you start getting WebMD and some of these other organizations are starting to put ratings out, so that people can kind of comparison shop. And to American consumers anyway, I think this is kind of a new thing for them. They're just used to saying, well, this is what my insurance covers. I'll go wherever. And I don't care what it costs because my insurance covers it. All I care about is what's my deductible and can I afford that? And then we're going to go ahead and do it. In some cases, the deductibles have gotten so high that people are able to travel to another country with their spouse, stay there, basically, fly down business class, stay in a great facility, have a private hospital room, recuperate in a 4 or 5 star hotel, and fly back and do that for like less than half of what it would cost them, even with their deductibles in the United States for certain procedures.
Yeah, let me just say that if that sounds good to people, I actually have a pretty good dentist here in town that I use. He speaks perfect English. He's a young guy, very impressive. And he also does surgery, all kinds of different dental work. So, if anybody in the Borderless network that, wants to come visit us, needs some dental work, I can hook you up with him.
And what's he charge?
Well, not much. I get a cleaning for 500 pesos or $25, something like that.
30.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't mind, I'll give you a quick example. I mean, we had a woman who she did go down to Mexico. It wasn't for dental, though. She, if you go to my podcast and you type in one of the keywords that we're talking about here, you'll be able to find this episode and you can hear all about it. But this woman had a major back injury. She was out fly fishing in like North Dakota or Montana or something like that and got attacked by a swarm of bees. Whoa. Right. And so they're chasing her all around. And so she really wrenched her back out. She's retired. And so it turned out that she had done major damage to several of her discs. And so she went to a well-known national, spinal disc surgery, company here in the United States and said, so they examined her, checked her all out. And they said, yeah, this is going to take like 4 surgeries and each surgery is going to cost X amount of dollars. It's going to be about $325,000. And she didn't have insurance that would cover that kind of thing, right? She's retired, and I guess whatever she was trying to look into Obamacare, that wasn't going to work, and through her work or her retirement program, that wasn't going to work. So she just lived in pain for about a month, trying to figure out what she was going to do. And finally, out of desperation, she went on the internet and just kind of started searching around for keywords like, I don't know, cheap spinal surgery or something like that, or inexpensive spinal surgery. And she came across this company down in Mexico that specializes in this kind of thing. So she called the doctor and said, well, can you help me? She sent him all the information. This gentleman has been, he's internationally renowned. He's had papers, that have been published in all the major, medical journals all over the world. He's a world-renowned spinal surgeon. So he had her come down there, checked her out and said, oh yeah, we can definitely help you. I can do all the surgery at once. We don't have to split it up into 4. And I believe she said it cost her out of pocket for the whole thing about $27,000.
Wow. And what that compared to how much again?
About $325,000.
Oh my God. That's what I was going to say. James, when we talk about like LASIK, or some of the plastic surgeries and stuff like that, those are at least elective surgeries where still there's some market involvement in keeping prices down. People are competing. But some of this other stuff that is so unbelievably regulated and everything, it's the percentage is just extraordinary. And there's a good example of that. But, so John, you've explained to us some of the reasons why people do this. Insurance doesn't cover it. Deductible is too high. They don't have insurance. The price is just too high by comparison. But there are some other situations that arise from time to time. For instance, there are certain types of medical treatment that involves things that are not legal in the United States, correct? Things perhaps related to stem cell research, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And I'm a huge proponent of stem cell therapies for a variety of reasons. I'll go off on a tangent just for a second here. I actually received stem cells in my knee. This was an approved procedure in the U.S. It was a fairly new procedure. I had torn a meniscus, which that's not what the stem cells was for. I had long-term damage from my time, in the military and carrying around a big heavy pack and all that kind of stuff. So in any case, I ended up getting donor stem cells, and these are not, there's for those who are really freaked out about the whole stem cell thing, these are not whatchamacallit,
embryonic.
Embryonic, right? So they're not the embryonic stem cells, which is the big religious people are freaking out over that. So you can actually make stem cells from skin cells now, or donate them from juvenile tissue. Unfortunately, just like everyone else, if someone dies in a car accident and they donate their organs to as a donor, basically, if you want to get kidneys and eyes and all this other kind of stuff like they do, and a lot of people do, and I'm an organ donor, part of that is they take cartilage tissue and you can get that spun off into stem cells and then help you regenerate new cartilage. And that's exactly what I had done. So the ethical aside, because that's not really an issue anymore, because they can do this without having to worry about using those kinds of stem cells. This is absolutely a massive, massive thing that's coming, and I don't think that the average person in the world really understands how huge this is. So we've had, I think, about 8 or 10 interviews now out of the 100 or so that we've done, where people have gone for things like autoimmune diseases, MS, and things like that, where they were told, hey, we're sorry, we've done everything that we can do for you in science here that the FDA approves. They've been in every study, every experimental thing, and there's nothing else we can do for you. And you are going to be in a wheelchair and eventually unable to carry on an adult conversation. And we're sorry, that's just life. Life sucks for you. And so our very first episode, actually, it's in our book and it's our very first podcast. Holly went out and she just said, I refuse to accept that. I'm not going to accept that my life is essentially, ending at this point. So she did the research and she went down at the time, it was pretty controversial. It was down in, I believe, in Costa Rica, and eventually the company moved to Panama and got stem cell therapy that has stopped. It doesn't cure the MS, but it has stopped the progression of it. And she is, now living a relatively pain-free and successful life. She has her own company and everything else. And this isn't just one person who just got lucky. I mean, we have 10 plus people that we've talked to, and they can give us another 10 or 20 examples of people that they've talked to get this done. And it's unbelievable the turnaround that people are having. And so there's a lot of different things you can use stem cells for to help alleviate problems or cure problems.
I think the movie, The Dallas Buyers Club, sort of woke a lot of people up to the reality of things like that. You saw the movie, right, John?
Unfortunately, I have not had a chance to see the movie. I've been busy with my business, but I've heard about it because people have mentioned that was one of the things that they were talking about in there.
Yeah, and I really appreciated it very much. It won the Oscar that year. It was great at, so you're a person in the United States and you have debilitating pain or you're dying. Maybe you have 9 months to live or something like that. And the idea is that this government agency, the FDA, is there because they care about you. They're there in the interest of your health and in your safety. And so you find out about a procedure, you take the time to do your due diligence, and you decide, I want this. And they say, no, I'm sorry. We know that you're dying in 9 months, but no, we care about you too much to allow you to have this procedure or this medication or something like that. This situation arises and people say, well, forget it. I'm leaving then. I'm going to go somewhere else where it is available. This happens all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're finding that more and more. We've had, we had a woman she had a son who was autistic. I believe she was living up in Maine, and they tried every possible single thing that they could, that was approved to try and help her son, and nothing would work. And so essentially what ended up happening was she went down to, I believe she also went down to somewhere in Central America. I can't remember exactly which country it was. It's been a while since we had the interview. But in any case, she took him down there for these therapies, these stem cell therapies. And all of her doctors were freaking out in the United States. They're like, you can't do that. It's unethical and all this other stuff. And she's like, how is it unethical? It's not, it's not disapproved down there. It's not approved here in the United States. But there's, it takes, I think I read somewhere, it takes somewhere like $1 billion in 10 years to get a procedure or drug approved in the United States. Sure. So, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist, but let's think about this for a second. If you're big pharma and you've got people taking all your drugs and you're making all these billions of dollars, and stem cell therapy, there's no real avenue for big pharma to make money off of that, right?
Absolutely not.
So it's kind of like, I'm not saying that they're actively pursuing against it. I'm just saying that, hey, this is not something that they're going to be looking into because there's not a whole lot of money for it when all it really is harvesting your stem cells and putting them back into you. They're your stem cells. They're not, it's not a drug, but that's what the FDA has ruled. And so there's a lot of organizations that are getting together and trying to get to the FDA to soften their stance on that and just say, look, all we're doing is basically, growing more stem cells and then turning around and putting them back into your body. They're yours. Why is this considered a drug? So, when you look at that, getting back to that story of the woman with the young son, he had an IQ of like 58 and was 8 or 9 years old at the time and still was wearing diapers and just really he was not, functioning in life like a normal 8-year-old kid. So after 6 years of these treatments, I think he's 13 or 14 years old now, and he's in high school. He has 100 IQ, and he's got a normal life. Now, some doctors would argue, well, that's anecdotal. There's no evidence that, it could have been luck. It could have been, and I suppose that's true. But when you hear story after story after story like this of how stem cells have succeeded, it really, brings into question, well, what are the motives? And the funny thing is some of the doctors that were working with her originally that saw the results that she had are now offering offshore that same procedure that her son had. The people who were originally telling her, no, don't go do that.
That's what I hate the most.
Yeah.
Is once they're found to be, shams, and that's what I'll go ahead and say they are, the next thing they're pursuing the same thing because they see the money in it.
Yeah. Right. I'd like to just interject that I watched this speech by Robert Higgs on kind of the economics and some of the unseen consequences of the practices of what we're talking about, the medical industry and stuff like that. And I'll include that in the show notes. It was a really great speech on, one of the things that he was saying was people talk about, the risk of putting something that might hurt people on the market. And that's what the people in the bureaucracy, they're worried about. They don't want it to come back and bite them. But at the same time, you have the risk of somebody who's, if you're going to die in 6 months, well, you're willing to take that risk. So there's two types of risk, and the individual's risk is not really taken into account. So I'll just include that speech in the show notes if people might be interested in this subject.
Yeah, I'd love to read that. Absolutely.
We're talking with John Cote, author, entrepreneur, and podcast host. He hosts Healthcare Elsewhere, the #1 podcast in the world of medical tourism. But we're going to take just a moment here to thank one of our sponsors. Today's Borderless podcast is brought to you by The Condescending Group, your online leader in promoting moral superiority. There's just no way out of it. People are succeeding out there and making you as an unproductive, condescending person look bad. So The Condescending Group encourages you to consider buying their new ebook entitled Quieting the Shame. Yes, for only $39.95, this groundbreaking new book will help you learn to reposition thoughts of guilt for making nothing out of your life. There are links to dozens of YouTube channels, yoga poses, specific primal screams, and ways of sarcastically criticizing others, despite their efforts that are sure to get any fully substantiated feelings of inadequacy out of your system, thereby cheating your mind's natural sense of right and wrong. Go to thecondescendinggroup.com. The Condescending Group, they care more than you. So we're back with John Cote. John Cote is an award-winning and Amazon.com #1 best-selling author of several books and host of Healthcare Elsewhere, a medical tourism podcast. And he's been doing a great job of cluing us into this subject. Why don't you, John, share with us some other, you've already shared a few, but maybe you have some other great success stories that people living in the United States have left for perhaps some medical treatment, care, surgeries or something, and been really glad that they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do that, real quick, I wanted to touch on something that James brought up earlier, and that is, the risk factors. I'm not, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware. I'm not advocating, hey, just go find the first place you can find online and go there and then hope for the best. As with anything else, you wouldn't go and pick a doctor here in the United States just because. I mean, you'd ask relatives, friends, anyone that had been to the person or people in your network, your insurance network, check online, look for reviews. You can do all those same things as far as, looking for reviews and talking to people who have been with those doctors in those facilities to get a better idea of who they are, what is their, what kind of certifications and qualifications they have and everything else. That being said, once you make that decision and move forward with that, there's some amazing things that can come out of being willing to open your mind and realize that, hey, just because, a lot of people consider here in the United States, oh, we have the world's best healthcare. Well, I don't believe that to necessarily be true all the time. It depends on what you've got and where you're going and whether or not you can afford it and everything else. So one of the things that really stood out to me, I was at the World Medical Tourism Conference in September. I was a speaker there this past year in Washington, D.C., and I was doing live interviews on the trade show floor. It was a lot of fun. We got to meet some really cool people. And one of the people that we interviewed was the CEO of a company down in Mexico who helps with a variety of things. They have some expatriates in the area, but mostly they're starting to do some medical tourism, and part of it has to do with cancer treatments. And so he told me the story of this woman from up in Canada who she had some kind of brain tumor, and her doctors had tried everything they could, and they said, "We're sorry, but we have nothing else that we can do for you. So we suggest that you get your affairs in order. We believe you have about 2 months to live." So this was a wife and mother of 2 children, and she went back to her home in Canada. And this was her Canadian doctors that had told her this. She had been to a bunch of different specialists and had tried a bunch of different treatments, and nothing seemed to be working. So she put her affairs in order, and about a week or two later, it took a week or so, and then like a week or two later, she was like, I'm not going to just sit here and die. This is ridiculous. So she started looking around online, and she found this company that I was talking about. And so she sent an email down to him and said, "Hey, here's my problem. Could you do anything for me? Is there any hope at all?" And so she sent her information down, her medical information, and they looked at it and they said, "Yeah, we believe that we can help you, and we would encourage you to come down immediately. We think we can help you." So she started making her travel arrangements. She called her main doctor, her doctor up in Canada, her oncologist, and explained to her what she was doing. And he freaked out. He was like, "What are you doing? You can't do that. That's dangerous." She's like, "I'm dying. What difference does it make? I mean, you've got to be kidding me. You're telling me not to go and take a chance on something that could possibly save my life." And the guy was like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm telling you," because he just didn't believe it, right? So she goes down there, and sure enough, the doctors down there had a new procedure that had not been yet vetted out or approved in Canada, but it was approved in Mexico. And they shrunk her brain tumor 80% in the span of like 3 or 4 weeks.
Wow.
So now I don't know if she's she didn't really want to. I invited her to come on the show. She's a very private person. She didn't really want to do that, but it was okay with her for us to just share the general story without using her name. So her thing was look, I don't know if she's going to survive long term. It's impossible to know that, but I know that she's going to last longer than the 2 months that she was here before. They've got it down to a size where it's manageable, and for right now, she has an unlimited, she can just keep going as it sits right now and just keep getting the treatments if it doesn't get any bigger. So when you look at that, and then, you've got to take with a grain of salt, if one doctor gives you an answer that doesn't agree with the outcome that you're looking for, then you can get a second opinion, get a third opinion, get a fourth opinion. And I don't mean go and talk to the same guys that they're all recommending in your town. I'm talking about look online, get some opinions from international doctors and other places and find out what else is available. You never know what might pop up.
I think that's such an important point. I mean, we see this concept of confirmation bias, this idea that we end up believing what we want to believe. It doesn't necessarily have to do specifically with medical tourism. We see it all over the place. The idea that Americans have about traveling or living outside of the United States is hilarious. I was talking with some people yesterday about the fact that, people will shudder at going to Mexico and yet tell them, "Oh, I'm going to New Orleans for Mardi Gras." And have a great time. When you are 7 times more likely to be murdered in New Orleans than you are in the country of Mexico, and the folly of really comparing countries to cities. It just doesn't make any sense. But this confirmation bias, I think that scientists and doctors often play an important role in that. This is something that I heard not too long ago. They quoted this JBS Haldane. He's got a lot of great quotes out there. And it was applied particularly to scientists and doctors more than the average public. He calls them the 4 stages of acceptance. Number 1, this is worthless nonsense. Number 2, well, that's an interesting but perverse point of view. Number 3, well, this is true but quite unimportant. Number 4, I always said so. So guys, look, listen to your doctor, pay attention to them, but you've got to mind yourself. And the fact of the matter is, historically, doctors have been wrong about a lot of things. That doesn't mean don't listen to them. It means maybe just don't listen to one. Maybe be willing to use your own mind, think outside of your borders and look at the other options that are available to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm looking back at some of our previous episodes. Again, it's hard to remember them all. We've had almost 100 at this point. And a lot of them had to do with people traveling to Mexico and Central America and the Caribbean and things. And some of them are India and different places. So, one of the things I would tell people is if you're skeptical and unsure about all this stuff, then, listen to some of our shows, see what you think, and contact some of those people. They have on the show notes, we have their contact information. So some of them are, people who, are experts in the field, or doctors, or they own medical facilities or something like that. And a lot of them are just patients, people who have just done it and they're very passionate about it. And they want to talk about, some of the things that are available and what they did. And they're just happy to share it because their families, for the most part, are like, you're going to go where and do what? Have you lost your mind? What are you talking? You can't do that. And that as an entrepreneur, I think that's one of my favorite things on the planet. When somebody tells me you can't do that, I'm like, okay, I'm going to find a way that I can do that because that just means that you can't do that, not that I can't do that.
That's right. This might be getting a little off topic, but I kind of feel like, we see the internet changing all these different markets around us. And I think that, possibly we haven't seen all the ramifications of what's going to happen with the medical profession. But I know a lot of people now who, if they have some sort of ailment or they're thinking about taking some sort of a drug or something like that, they'll go online and look at, WebMD or something like that. And then they can go shop around internationally. So, I'm not sure exactly what it'll look like, but I know that a lot of people, you can go to a doctor, get his opinion, but then you can also go and do a lot of research yourself on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's starting to happen too? It's kind of funny. I've had a couple of different mastermind groups that I'm in, and a couple of them and other people have mentioned, hey, you should start basically kind of like Angie's List for medical tourism. And I'm like, that's kind of a cool idea. I like that. And so I started looking around, and of course, there are already people doing that, which is great. We interviewed a couple of these companies, and what they're doing is one's based here in the United States. There's another one based over in France. There's one based over in Germany.
Would you mind
giving
giving those websites out?
Yeah, absolutely. The one over in Germany, I can put these into the show notes page. It's medigo.com, medigo.com, I think it is, over in Germany. And they just got their Series A round, I think, for about 6.9 or 7.2 million or something like that to fund this thing. So, they've got venture capital invested in this. They've got a great team. I talked to one of their CEOs and founders and interviewed them, met with some of them at the Medical Tourism Conference. And it's a great place to go. So you go in, you can start typing in a search for like hip replacement or whatever, and it'll autofill, all the different options you can go to. And then when you click on it, it'll come up and it'll show you, here's a bunch of options for you. So they come up with, kind of like a, almost a travel website or Travelocity.com or somebody like that, where they've got basically, hey, here's some options for you with patient reviews and some pictures of the facility and where you're going to be staying and what they offer and what the pricing is. The pricing is actually listed right there. Here in the U.S., think about that for a second. I want you to, as a favor to yourself, if you're looking at getting a procedure and you don't have insurance, call, 5 or 10 different hospitals from around the country and ask, hey, how much is it for hip replacement surgery? And probably 3 of them won't be able to give you an answer because they're going to say, well, what insurance do you have? And you're going to say none. And they're going to go, we don't know, because they can't tell you that number. Right. And the other 7 that you get are going to be so wildly different, you'll be shocked. It'll be anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000. And so here's a company that's basically going, okay, yep, boom, here you go. Here's the pricing. It's all set up and ready to go. And then there was another one, I'll have to see if I can look this up real quick, where basically they're doing bidding for patients here in the United States. So what you do is you put your basic medical information in, what your problem is, say you need, hip replacement surgery or whatever, and then doctors from all over the world have access to this who are members, and they've been vetted out, and they say, okay, yeah, we can do that surgery for this price or for that price. And we interviewed one of the patients who went and did this, and he ended up staying in the United States because he got his surgery done for, I think the initial quote was going to be almost $100,000 for, and I think it was hip replacement surgery. And he ended up getting it done in Houston for, I believe, $16,000 or $17,000.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, this is what we're looking for as examples of this type of thing. So you mentioned Medigo.com. That was a German company. Did you tell us there was another one?
Yeah, there's a couple of them. I'm trying to scroll through as I'm talking here and see if I can come up with them real quick for you.
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
We'll get them in the show notes.
Yeah, just send them over and we'll.
Sure.
That's funny what you were saying about calling the people up and seeing if they know what they're charging. Speaking of another video that I watched, I can't remember this guy's name, but he was a doctor for a long time in the United States, and he was saying that he had done this big investigation of where all the costs are coming from in the United States. What is costing all this money? And, he found most doctors have no idea even what they charge.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. Oh, here you go. It's Medibid, MEDIBID, Medibid.com. It's an American company. Ralph Weber's the CEO. I actually had him on the show last year. It's episode 59. You can listen to it all about that. And then one of his patients that used his system actually came on the show as well, and we talked to them. So, that's just there are several of them like that. And this is starting. You look at the news media. Of course, I'm not a huge fan of the news media because they're just kind of full of they're looking to fill airtime, I think, most of the time. But when you look at what's available and what's happening out there, and they're saying, okay, but bidding, to them it seems kind of salacious. They're like, really, do we really want doctors bidding do we want doctors bidding for the lowest service? I'm like, if they're world-class doctors and they can give you what you want, why wouldn't you? It's competition, right? Competition works everywhere else in capitalism for the most part, right? Why not in the medical community? And so those in the medical community who don't want to compete like that are not happy about that, and they're freaking out and, kind of raise roadblocks. Like, happens with Uber, for example. Uber, everywhere Uber goes, the local governments try and shut them down so that they can't. That's the car company, the company where you can rent basically car time and have somebody pick you up instead of a taxi. And it's cheaper and more convenient and usually a better experience. And so, same kind of thing. Legislators can try and fix that, but eventually the technology overtakes them and there's just nothing they can do about it. So.
Don't get us started, John Cote. As a matter of fact, that's what I was thinking about when you said medibid.com. Oh, my God, it could be like eBay in the future. That's the thing. I mean, who do you want to trust? A supposedly caring, enormous, gargantuan government agency that has no built-in incentive to do a good job protecting you? Or would you like an abundance of reviews from all over the world demonstrating what real people are saying? And wouldn't that be funny if it actually came down to something like that, where not only would doctors or medical facilities actually bid on your surgery, but you could see the results of their histories and what people have to say about them? I have no problem with that.
Yeah, and that's what some of these companies that we're talking about, exactly what they're doing. And, on a side note, you mentioned a very interesting word that's near and dear to my heart, abundance. There's a great entrepreneur and author by the name of Peter Diamandis. He founded the X Prize, the original X Prize to put civilians in space. And that with the 10th year anniversary of the first successful launch just went by. And he's got a new book out. But his book from 2 years ago is called Abundance. And if you haven't read it already, it's a great primer of basically getting people to think exponentially instead of linearly. The human brain works in a linear fashion, and by teaching you to think exponentially and understanding that things are happening so rapidly now, and for some people it freaks them out and they don't like that. But, as an example, you talk about where are things going in the medical community right now with stem cell therapy? So here in the U.S., we kind of cut back on stem cell therapy with government funding because of religious issues. And, I get that freaks some people out, and that's fine. That's your belief system. I got no problem with that. But in the meantime, all we did was offshore that. So other countries are now, way ahead of us on some of that stuff. And we're trying to play catch up now. And so when you look at the capabilities, this whole concept of exponential growth, we're at the knee of the curve, essentially, especially, where things are starting to shoot upwards rapidly. You've got like IBM has the Watson program, which is basically an extremely intelligent computer that beat the two major Jeopardy champions in competition, right? Which is fantastic. Well, you can now, as an app developer, buy that service, software as a service, and use it as a way to help doctors do diagnoses. So you can put all the problems that the patient is having in there, and Watson will come up with a bunch of answers for you. So for the average doctor who's not really keeping up with every possible new development going on, there's all sorts of extra information in there that they never would have probably thought about before, or would have taken them more time than they had to deal with to help this patient. So, from a diagnosis perspective, all of that's going to greatly help, like the Apple Watch, having that on your wrist and having some of that data be freely available to, big data and getting trends and figuring out why things are happening. So anyway, it's a great book that talks about not just in medicine, but in a variety of ways, how dramatically things are changing and how it's for the better. Don't freak out about this stuff. The computers are not going to take over and be our overlords. It's okay. Don't just be a little trusting.
That's funny you mentioned that. I just pre-ordered the new book that he has with Peter. How do you pronounce the last name? Diamandis, but I just pre-ordered that book this morning.
Diamandis. Diamandis. And Stephen Kotler. Yeah.
Just this morning.
Yeah, I just got that email too this morning and pre-ordered that book. It looks like it's going to be another great one. I was listening to some of the pre stuff they had on it, and it's just those are the kinds of things that we want to see happening. And you look at guys like Elon Musk. I mean, I live in Huntsville, Alabama. This is like the rocket city. Most of the rocket engineers for NASA live here, right? My father-in-law has worked on some of those programs. So, there's an embedded way of thinking, and hey, this is the way rockets work, and this is the way they're always going to work, and you can't do it any other way. And then 10 years ago, Elon Musk comes out and says, hey, I got a bunch of money. I'm going to make a rocket company and shave the cost of rockets by a hundredfold. And they're all laughing and going, that's never going to happen. Well, now all of a sudden, we're here to the point where he's shooting off rockets for about 25% of the cost of what Boeing and Lockheed can do. And eventually it looks like he's going to be able to succeed with returning the first and second stages of the rocket back instead of throwing them away and being reused. And he'll be able to get another tenfold, reduction in price. So all of a sudden you start looking at, it doesn't cost, $450 million to launch a heavy satellite into orbit anymore. You can do it for like $5 million. Well, that's a game changer. And that's happening here in the next 4 or 5 years. And all of a sudden, everyone here locally is like, wow, we never thought he'd be able to do something like that. And so it's just different people from different industries having an abundant mindset and thinking in different ways that are dramatically changing what we have available to us. And I think the same thing will happen in medicine as well.
Right. Well, sounds like right up our alley on this show, the Borderless Podcast, since we talk about not only international borders, but we talk about mental borders. Question for you, John. Would you say that the Affordable Care Act, aka Obamacare, will increase or decrease medical tourism, in your opinion? Increase.
Really? Dramatically. Yeah. I think the unknowns that you're seeing or will help to, I'm not, it's whether politically you're for it or against it is really completely irrelevant at this point. Right. As an entrepreneur and someone who owns a company, and you start looking at hiring employees, and I have companies that we deal with that we work with that are at that 50 employee buffer, and they're kind of like, well, do I really want to grow more? And then I'll have to do, all these different things. And they get concerned about that. There are now companies who are specializing and saying, look, you will help you self-insure and send with their option, you can send your employees down to, say, Costa Rica or down to Grand Cayman or over to India or wherever you want to get different procedures. And they can pay them to fly first class with their spouse, stay in a nice facility, the whole bit, and they will get as good or better treatment than they would have in the United States. And what they do is they don't charge a deductible, right? So I interviewed one company specifically. They were on, I think, 60 Minutes or something like that, did an interview with them last year. And so what they were doing was sending their employees at the employee's option. They didn't have to do this, but what they started doing was incentivizing it, which was brilliant. So they said, look, you can go to any doctor you want here in the United States to get your hip replacement surgery, and it'll cost you a $5,000 deductible. Or at your option, what you can do is go down to Costa Rica, where we have already pre-vetted out a doctor and a facility and people, and we've had our own employees go down there and travel. You can talk to them and ask them how was their experience. They'll pay for a nice business class ticket to fly you and your spouse or whoever's going to go with you on your surgery down to this facility. You get a nice hotel. You stay in the hospital, has a private room, private nurse that speaks English, or they get an interpreter for you. And what they're doing is saying, okay, look, so we'll do all of this. You're going to stay down there and recover for a couple of weeks after, and then come home. And there's no deductible. We pay the deductible for you, and we pay all of your expenses, including a daily stipend for food, and we'll give you a couple $1,000s of running around money while you're down there. And what they've found is that the vast majority of their employees are picking that option and choosing to do that. Their employee morale is up. Their sick leave and sick time is down. People are not putting off procedures. They're going and getting them taken care of and coming back onto work. And they're finding that their rates of attendance are higher than they were previously. And so, I mean, it's been a win-win for them, and they're self-insuring it. They're not having to worry about, for those who want to go out and do the insurance option, they can, but most of their employees are now choosing to go down and get it done in Costa Rica.
Yeah, that's a great option. I have a question for you for some entrepreneurs that are looking at this market. What are some, after interviewing what do you have, almost 100 podcasts now, all these people that have something to do with medical tourism, what are some opportunities that you see in the market that maybe some people can pick up on?
Wow. Well, there's a lot of them. I mean, I've seen everywhere from, people who are in the insurance industry saying, okay, there are people who are traveling and they need, kind of emergency backup, insurance. It's not medical insurance that's going to cover the procedure. It's going to cover them if there's a problem or a complication while they're there, or if they need to go back, it'll cover that. So there's some options there if you're in the insurance industry. There are people who are, they used to be a nurse or somehow connected to the medical field, and they've started their own companies being medical tourism facilitators. So what they do is they're essentially like travel agents with a medical background, and they're helping you. They work with different doctors and facilities, and they help you, kind of choose and pick where you should go. And basically, they're kind of like your medical concierge. Obviously, you need to vet them out and make sure they've been in business for a while, and just like anything else. But we're seeing a lot more people, and there's certification courses they can take that are starting to do that as an option for a larger play. We interviewed, and I can't remember his name. I apologize off the top of my head, but he was one of the first doctors in the Philadelphia area nationally to conduct stem cell therapies to repair damaged heart. It was an experimental FDA thing. This was like back in 2007, maybe 2008. And so it was getting so long and so arduous to try and go through that process to get the approvals. They ended up going out, raising the funds and going down to the Bahamas. They worked with the Bahamian government to come up with standards and everything else so that it wasn't just the Wild West. They said, no, we want to make sure that, you're happy with all of this and everything. So they got together with their medical boards and put all the standards together over a couple of years, and then built a world-class heart institute and facility down there in the Bahamas. They just opened it last, I think it was in September. We interviewed them right before they had opened up. And so now, from just a couple hours flight from most of the eastern United States, or, a half a day's flying from the West Coast, or shoot 20 minutes from Miami, you can fly to the Bahamas and you can get stem cells injected directly into your heart, your own stem cells, to help repair damage from, aging or arterial sclerosis. I think it's pronounced. I apologize. I'm not a medical professional, but in any case, so what they did was said, hey, we're not going to wait around for the U.S. and the FDA to figure this out. We're going to go ahead and offshore this to a government that is welcoming this to us, and we're doing it in an ethical manner and helping as many people as we can, and offering it at a very affordable price. So I'm starting to see more and more companies doing that sort of thing. More doctors are starting to do that sort of thing and offer that sort of thing. Absolutely. And the other one, by the way, before I forget, is surgiprice.com. This is another one that we interviewed. And they are offering the same kind of thing where you can go on there and get an idea of what the pricing is and get people bidding and whatnot. I think it's a great service.
You're listening to the Borderless Podcast. We're talking with John Cote, author, entrepreneur, podcast host. He hosts Healthcare Elsewhere, a medical tourism show. Ordinarily, this question might not make sense to someone who specializes in medical tourism specifically, but John Cote is also an award-winning and Amazon.com #1 best-selling author of several books, and he's a member of the Power Marketing Consultants Network. So there is a question that we will leave you with anyway, because we always do. James?
Sure, John. As an entrepreneur, if somebody else was coming along and wanted to start their own business, like we kind of just talked about, What is the the best piece of advice that you could give someone like that?
Okay. Well, let me think about that for a second. I'll tell you what. I really love this quote by Elon Musk. He's kind of a hero of mine. You know, he's for those who are not familiar, he founded PayPal and took the money that he made from PayPal, about $250 million or something like that, $200 million, and then turned it into SpaceX, which is a rocket company, Tesla, and Solar City. Right. So he's a wildly successful entrepreneur. And they were interviewing him on 60 Minutes a little while ago. And one of the interviewers looked at him incredulously when he said that the probability of failure of both Tesla and SpaceX individually was extremely high. And this interviewer just looked at him and said, why would you even bother if you knew that it was likely to fail? And he looked him straight in the eye without even batting an eyelash. And he said words to the effect of, a high probability of failure is not a good enough reason to not do something. And I just love that attitude and that mindset. I mean, obviously, you need to get your ducks in a row. You don't want to go ahead and drop your entire 401k into something that's just probably not going to work. But he went after a very high risk thing that he believed that he could completely and utterly change the dynamic of what was being done and basically beat people at their own game. And he's doing just exactly that. And I love that mindset. So if you're going to take the plunge and come in and be an entrepreneur, you've got to go all in. And it can't just be, I'm passionate about it. I mean, there's a great book by, what's his name? Michael Gerber. The E-Myth Revisited, and he talks briefly, or he talks the whole book basically about, just because, let's say everyone in town tells you you're the world's best cake baker, well, that doesn't mean you're going to be the world's best bakery. You know what I mean? Just because you know how to bake cakes doesn't mean you know how to run a bakery. They're two different skill sets. And so you need to make sure that you understand the business side of what you're getting into before you go leaping into that. But I would heavily encourage anyone to do it. I've had multiple companies and I absolutely love it.
Fantastic. Well, John, it's been great having you on. We thought we were going to talk primarily about medical tourism, and we did talk primarily about medical tourism, but we also got so much more. Definitely a guy who thinks outside of his borders, and we appreciate your coming on the Borderless podcast.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I really appreciate you guys having me on, and I know I get off topic sometimes. I get really excited about, the future of where all this is going, so I appreciate you indulging me.
All of it relevant to what we do here and talk about here.
Great. Anytime. My pleasure.
So it's actually been our pleasure to have John Cote on the Borderless podcast. Medical tourism, just one more reason why if you think outside your borders, you can be handsomely rewarded. Once again, if you have anything to add, go ahead and go to borderlesspodcast.com. Click on Join Now. We'll give you access to our private Facebook page where you can get involved in the conversation. Also, if you go over to iTunes for us, and if you'd rank, review, and subscribe, we sure would appreciate it. Another Borderless podcast coming up soon.
Thanks for joining us for the Borderless Podcast, traveling, investing, and living beyond borders.